Hi, everyone. This is an episode series that's going to ask, is 119 Ministries right to win Jews? We must teach them to accept Paul. They don't quite put it that way, but we'll see. They are basically saying you can't just have Jesus, you've got to have Paul and Jesus. So it boils down to they're saying you have to teach people to accept Paul, and how would you go about doing that? And they offer evidence and proof of that. And I'm going to question, is that a good strategy? And we'll see. This will be episode one because it's going to take a lot of unpacking to do. This was a 40-minute episode they did. I'm going to try to keep this much shorter than that, this first introductory episode. And here's how they introduce it. It's called the Deuteronomy 13 Test. So they're going to explain why we need to study what the Deuteronomy test is. And this is what Jews would think about when you try to teach someone who has allegedly done away with the law. And they're putting Jesus in the same lump, that he and Paul both did away with the law. And he does a good job of proving that Jesus did not do away with the law. But with Paul, he uses other means to try to prove he didn't do away with the law than just then looking at Paul's actual passages that are cited for that proposition, and then he doesn't offer any explanation of those many passages. So I just think there's something missing there, but I'm not going to even address that today. That'll be in future episodes. Here's what the question was. Have you ever considered why the Jews reject the Jewish Messiah, our Lord and Savior? Millions of Jews reject the Christian presentation of Jesus and Paul, alarmingly, because the Word of God says to. So what they're saying is, the way we present Jesus and Paul, you have to reject Christianity because it's presented as a religion that gets rid of the Torah. All right, so I'm just giving you a heads up what's inside the video. Sadly, if the misunderstanding continues, Jews are forever prevented from not only not knowing, I think he meant prevented from knowing their Jewish Savior, but also from experiencing the blessings of the new covenant. This teaching examines Deuteronomy 13 test used and how it can prevent some from finding their Messiah. Okay, so he's going to basically show you if you contradict or add to the text that's in the Torah, you are a false prophet and we have to reject you. Okay, so let's go on. So this is how I broke it down. Is 119 Ministries right to win Jews? One, we must teach them, the Jews, Jewish people, to accept Paul and not Jesus alone. So you can't, he's not giving you an option that you can just present Jesus. So now I'm going to say he didn't address this. He has a supposition you have to preach them together. Why can't you preach them apart? And we'll see. I'll ask the question. And two, we must insist, he says, it is a false teaching that Paul was an apostate against the law Yahweh gave Moses. He didn't use the word apostate, but that's a shorthand version. The rule of apostasy is what is known as Deuteronomy 1 to 10, which he is, the whole article here is about, video articles about. Okay, now I'm gonna give you a thumbnail, a quote, his major quote, and then I'm going to go show you what his proof was. In the video on the Deuteronomy 13 test, 119 Ministries concedes its meaning, the meaning of Deuteronomy 13. If we present Yeshua or even Paul as working miracles and having true visions, signs, and wonders, yet also teach different commandments using their teachings, a true Jew would reject that without hesitation, not because they are stubborn, ignorant, prideful, or anything of the like, because they believe the first half of the Bible to be true, meaning they've accepted the Torah, the law, and the prophets. So they would have to reject Jesus. They would have to reject Paul. But again, that's the way he's presenting it. You would have to present both Jesus and Paul rather than present Jesus, who clearly doesn't violate that principle, in my view. All right, he gave three primary proofs. I'm just going to review them in summary form, but when we go into it in a deeper dive in the next episode and later episodes, we'll show you his words. I don't want to take any words out of context. One, Deuteronomy 13, 1 to 5, also 6 to 10, he says, teaches that any prophet who adds to or subtracts from the Torah in a contradictory way is a false prophet, and by definition is leading the people to another God. Paul or Jesus would be a false prophet if either added or subtracted even a single commandment of God. His second main proof is that James in Acts 21, verses 21 to 22, says supposedly that Paul is law obedient and wants Paul to merely prove that to the Jews who are reporting that Paul claims the law has been done away for sons of Israel. 3. Peter in 2 Peter 3:15-16 is misunderstood by those who lack understanding that Paul says lawless things when Paul does not, in fact, do so. So uh, you basically are being told by Peter that you are misunderstanding him if you misunderstand Paul to be anti-law, and it shows a lack of knowledge on your part. That's how he understands it. And then in number 4, Paul in the book of Acts states Paul upholds the law and the prophets and sworn court testimony. 5, Paul in the book of Acts is said to have led many Jews to salvation in his preaching, which would not be possible had Paul taught the law was done away with. And he has some validity to that. There are certain churches that accepted him, but then he doesn't mention that there are several synagogues, particularly in Pisidia, that reject Paul's message, also in Ephesus, and both times kick him out, and we're not given a great explanation by Luke what's the reason for in either case. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this episode is just deal with one counterexample, and I want to explain why that's all a Jewish person needs to have, and I will show you they're totally armed for the issue and to defeat this argument of 119 Ministries just by one counterexample that Tom Eisinger talks about many times, and we're going to play a clip from him so you can just see the example. Now, what is a counterexample? Okay, basically, if Paul is misunderstood according to the way he's saying Second Peter is an authority, and Paul is really not lawless, and we have to assume you're assuming in that argument that Peter saw all the epistles of Galatians and Romans, Corinthians and Romans that on their surface appear to do away with the law, and yet 119 Ministries is thinking you can defeat all of that by the proof I've given you so far. But all a Jewish person has to be armed with is one passage that Tobias Singer relies upon quite heavily to just be a complete counterexample that Paul does do away with the law by rewriting it, particularly. Now, I just want to show you why counterexamples are the right way to test any proposition. And by the way, in science, so if someone says something is true in science, how do you test it? You test it to see if you can find a counterexample where it isn't always true. Therefore, it is not entirely true. There's something misleading or false or incomplete in the proposition. So is there something false or incomplete in the proposition that we have to teach Jews to accept Paul? Because if we don't have to do that, we can easily get them to accept Jesus, because Jesus is not apostate by even any stretch of the imagination. He's the opposite in Matthew 5, verse 17-19, and in many other places. So what is a counterexample, and what does it do in legal argument and logical argument? I want to also talk to you about the word logos or logic. An argument is valid if and only if there are no counterexamples to the argument. So if 119 Ministries can be shown, and I'm going to show you right here in the very first episode, if their proposition can be shown to suffer a counterexample where Paul can clearly be proven to be an apostate is to at least one commandment of God, that's all it takes for Jewish people to say, I don't have to listen to him. And 119 Ministries may not be aware of this, maybe not, I don't know. But the point is that we need to know that Jewish people are totally aware of this because of Tobias Singer. Now, this definition of counterexample is from the University of Auckland's online course on logical and critical thought. Now, I want to tell you that Jesus is one of the most logical, rational human beings you'll ever hear. That's why his gospels themselves are the miracle. You just have to read them, and you'll say there is no thinker, philosopher, or anybody who has ever been as profound and as ingenious in the expression of the human language and using contrast and antithesis to make points. It's just that, to me, when I always read Jesus, I always go, this is itself the miracle that proves to me who he is, because there is nothing I've ever read since. I can read Tolstoy, I can read, Dostoevsky, whatever it is. Nobody can think and articulate things as well as Jesus Christ. And I just want you to know the word logic, people go, oh, well, we don't have to be logical. Jesus is called the Logos, right? Well, what is related to Logos is the word logic. And I just showed you up there in the etymology that in the word logic comes from the word Logos. And in Greek, it doesn't just mean the word, it also means reason. It means speech, but it also means reason. So when we think of Jesus, we forget that he is the most reasonable, rational person that you've ever meet. Completely articulate, completely brilliant, ingenious. Like when he's asked about should we pay taxes? He says, "Let me see the image on the coin. Who does this coin belong to?" It says, Caesar. Well, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but give to God what is God's. I mean, it's ingenious to make a point. So anyway, let's go on. All right, in this particular verse, which I'll quote next, Paul will make a claim that he knows what God Yahweh intended in a verse, and it is entirely or altogether different than its literal meaning. So in other words, he's going to completely change the meaning of it that you see on the page so that it has a completely and entirely different meaning, and he uses those words entirely and altogether different meaning is what he says it has than you would think just reading it. Okay, so here's the verse, Deuteronomy 25, verse 4 in the King James Version. Thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treads out the corn. Seems pretty innocuous, right? Just simple. Now, because Paul's going to say he sees something different here than it reads on the face of it, we need to go look at the more than just this verse first to get a context in which we can place his claims. So we need to know about Judaism, or the Torah's view of the treatment of animals, and there's an article called jewfacfaq.org/animals. So I got some of this information. It explains that animals rest on Sabbath as humans do in the Torah, Exodus 20, verse 10. Animals can partake of the produce from fields lying fallow during the sabbatical year, Exodus 23:11. Humans are required to relieve an animal of its burden, lying under its burden, or cannot move, or it fell down, even if they do not like its owner, do not know its owner, or even if it is ownerless, Exodus 23, verse 5, and Deuteronomy 22, verse 4. So what does Paul do with this verse? This is in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 7 to 11. So Paul has an opposing view of what this verse means. It doesn't have anything to do with an ox. Altogether, entirely different meaning. Let's see. Verse 7. Who goes a warfare any time at his own charges? Who plants a vineyard and eats not of the fruit thereof? Or who feeds a flock and eats not of the milk of the flock? Now that has nothing to do with this passage, right? But directly. But he's just talking about, you need support when you're going to do certain things. That's just a human argument. That's not the Torah talking. Verse 8, say I these things as a man, or says not the law the same also? So now he's going to say, I'm not just saying it as a man. This is something that's right inside the law. God speaks this command to us. Verse 9, for it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treads out the corn. Does God take care for oxen? Deuteronomy 25, verse 4. You need to understand that's what we call a rhetorical question, which means the answer is no, he doesn't. So you ask it like, does God take care of animals? No, of course not. That's the implication. That's what you're supposed to be thinking in your head. Next. And then he actually expresses this in the next verse. 10. Or says he it altogether for our sakes. The word there I'm going to show you in Greek is the word for entirely in the Mount C transliteral. It has no other meaning. Or says he it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that plows should plow in hope, and he that threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. What does he want? He wants pay for the pastors. He's been engaging in this. He originally didn't take any funds, but apparently he did take later. But I don't think it matters whether he took funds or didn't. He is trying to get money for people who are preaching and teaching, which that's a whole nother problem that Jesus said, no, you can't do that. That's in Matthew 10:10. Can't do that. Jesus said, freely you receive, freely you must give. So the only way you can support yourself is you could become a guest in someone's home and do service work in their house. And then if you did enough work, you under the law were entitled to a salary. This is called the law of hospitality, where a guest can eventually earn money while they're staying in your home. Anyway, so let's continue. Verse 11, if we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things? So now that's not coming out of the Bible. It's not supported by anything unless this verse is true. And that's what his whole point was. So now he's extracting the principle is reasonable that he sees in God's word. that it altogether is for our sakes. That it means when Paul, is putting his hand to the plow and sowing the seed, which is what a oxen helps you do. It treads up the earth and builds it up, and you throw in the seed. And when you gain the harvest, you can eat it. And that's what he's saying is that's what it meant. Don't muzzle the ox. Let him eat as he gives the seed into the ground. Okay, so what did he do here? He completely eviscerated the verse. He took away all of its meaning about helping an ox while it's treading out the grain. He says it's altogether for our benefit. It was never meant for the oxen. God doesn't care about oxen. Isn't that right? He said it matter-of-factly, and you can't take it back now. It's just all out there. And I want to show you, this is the Mount C transliteral. The word is pantos, entirely. Or does he not speak entirely for our sake? Rhetorical question. And there's the word in the King James they translated as altogether, which is a satisfactory synonym. Now I want you to listen to Tobias Singer, because if 119 Ministries is correct, they have to prove that there wouldn't be something sticking in the mind of a Jewish person that would block them from taking the arguments of 119 Ministry and running the ball with them and saying, okay, I'll become a Christian. Because they know there is a proof that Paul violated the very thing that 119 Ministry says. If Paul violated that, he's a false prophet and would have to be rejected. And he does violate it right there in that passage. There's no doubt about it. No escape from it. And we're going to show you, even in the early church, he was criticized for this by Macarius Magnus, saying exactly what I'm telling you. So from a Christian perspective, it's the same thing. So Tobias Singer is not unique. Even Christians condemned him for this. Okay? Of course, you don't read this because your pastors don't want to hear about things that are critical of Paul. But we're going to make you listen to Macarius Magnus when this is done. So we're going to let Tobias Singer talk now.
The Torah cares so much about animals that we're not allowed to, even when we come home, if we're hungry and the animal's hungry, you have to feed your animals first. The Torah says something very interesting. And the Torah is so cautious about an animal, and an animal shouldn't suffer. The Torah says, like 4 words, this passage 4 words, like sachshim shoy b'dishoy, which means that when you're out plowing with an animal, when you're out in the field with your behemoth, with your ox, you're not allowed to put a muzzle on it. Why? Because when an ox is walking, is pulling you the plow through a field, what does he see? Now to you it looks like a bunch of hay, looks like just some grass. But to him, that's lunch, that's breakfast. It's delicious to him. To him it's a pastrami sandwich. And to muzzle an animal while it's pulling the plow, that means the animal can't even eat as it's walking, as it's pulling a plow through the field. This causes an animal a tremendous amount of anguish. The Torah is Rachmana, it's called. It's merciful, and it was written by the merciful one who gave these words to Moses of blessed memory, our great teacher. So the Torah says it's a forbidden practice. You're not allowed to, like sachsim shoy b'dishoy, you're not allowed to muzzle an animal when it's plowing the field. Could anything be more simple? No. It's a forbidden practice. Not allowed to do it. You have to make sure the animal doesn't have a muzzle on its mouth, and when it's pulling the plow, it's kenessin, it can eat. It's not deprived of the food. What does Paul say? It's a shocking text. In 1 Corinthians 9 and 10, Paul says, it's really unbelievable, although it was written in the law of Moses, that you shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading in the grain. Then he goes, do you really think that the Torah cares about oxen, that this was written? And then verse 10 says, is it not speaking entirely for our sake? I mean, it's not talking about oxen. There's no prohibition of muzzling an animal as it's moving through a field. It has nothing to do with oxen. It has to do with feeding a pastor, that those who are leaders of the church. That's what it's talking about. He totally undoes what it says in the Torah. So there's a very simple commandment. I mean, I know for many people this may be shocking, and I have a feeling, I'm not sure, that I think for many Christians or ex-Christians who watch the show are going, you know, I've been a Christian for 35 years. I never even thought about that. How did Paul have the right to do that? And then the Christians love to attack the Jews for inventing the oral law that we add to the law, that we take away from the law. They love to do that. But they somehow, the weights and measurements here are so unbalanced. Why don't you apply that question to Paul? What right do you have to take the words of the Torah, which say, like, and to say it's not talking about oxen, it's talking about us entirely? Where does Paul get a right to do that? So that's obviously such an idea, is so opposed by the scriptures, is such an innovation, self-serving innovation of Paul. And 1 Corinthians, you should know, is one of the 7 indisputed letters of Paul. That's definitely from his hand. Let alone what Paul will say, what Paul says just 2 chapters later in First. So that's not from, no religious Jew would ever say such a thing. No person who was an Orthodox Jew / Pharisee would ever say that when it says, it means that he say, do you think that the law of Moses is really concerned about oxen? Are you insane? I'm sorry if this sounds, this really bothers me. It bothers me because the Torah is talking about not causing an animal suffering. That you have to make sure that when it's plowing the field, okay, but make sure you don't cause it to suffer by muzzling it, that it can't eat when it's taking care of your needs. Mouthing for.
Okay, and I want to read Macarius Magnus now, his commentary from his work, the Apocrypticus, volume 330-36. He wrote this about 300 AD, so this is pre-Constantinian Christianity, pre-Roman Catholicism. He was defending the Orthodox Christian issues, but making an exception for not defend Paul in this case, or that's how it looks to me. He says that Paul, disassembles means he conceals his motives, the gospel for the sake of vainglory, that means for gain, and the law for the sake of covetousness, that speaks for itself, is plain from his words. Whoever goes to war at his own charges, who shepherds the flock and does not eat of the milk of the flock, 1 Corinthians 9:7. And in his desire to get hold of these things, he calls in the law as a supporter of his covetousness, saying, or does not the law say these things? For in the law of Moses it is written, thou shalt not muzzle an ox that is treading out the corn. Verse 9. Then he adds a statement which is obscure and full of nonsense by way of cutting off the divine forethought from the brute beast, saying, does God take care of the oxen, or does he say it on our account? On our account it was written. Verse 10. It seems to me that in saying this he is mocking the wisdom of the Creator, as if it contained no forethought for the things that had long ago been brought into being. He means that Paul is saying that God had no forethought for care of animals. And we've already seen that the Bible shows and the Torah shows repeatedly that God did care for animals. So Paul's supposition was contradicted by other verses in the Bible that God does care for the animals, and very much so. And then Macarius continues, for if God does not take care of oxen, pray, why is it written, he that has subjected all things, sheep and oxen and beasts and birds and the fishes? Psalm 8, verses 8-9. I think that something got a little bit lost in translation there, but I think what he's saying is, why has God basically said all these sheep, oxen, and beasts and birds and the fishes are subject to human protection? And that's what God says in the beginning when he gives the animals to Adam. If he takes account of fishes, much more of oxen which plow and labor, wherefore I am amazed at such an impostor, calls Paul an impostor, who pays such solemn respect to the law because he is insatiable for the sake of getting a sufficient contribution from those who are subject to him. And I have to say, don't you notice, 119 Ministries, that the one exception that the Pauline Christians make in today in Christianity is anything that involves gaining money from the flock? It's a very obvious exception. So Paul is very negating if you don't accept it, but I see a negation of the law in Galatians 3:19, for example, and many other places. So Paul only makes an exception. The law continues if he can find a way to construe it to put money in his pocket or in the people who support him, and therefore get an advantage by affiliating with him, because the 12, it's very clear in Epistle of John, he even says our missionaries don't go out and take any money from Gentiles. But Paul was doing that all the time. And why wouldn't they want to take money from Gentiles? Because Jesus said you're not supposed to take money from those you preach and teach to, because obviously you're going to be influenced to give a gospel that will be light enough that they can accept and won't be burdensome. and it's going to be placating them and what they want to hear and not what is really the word of God. That's the risk that John in his epistle was alluding to, why you don't take money from Gentiles. Let's continue. All right. All right, we're going to get into it next time about Acts 21. So this is a major point of 119 Ministries about why he thinks that Paul was law compliant, because he says James actually said Paul was a law compliant person, as if he knew Paul's heart and had a miraculous knowledge of who who was Paul on the inside. Could Paul have hidden himself from James? And 119 Ministry just assumes that if James says something, he's the bishop of Jerusalem, he's not even an apostle, that somehow it has some miraculous inspired qualities to it, and that gives us all the truth we need. And I'm going to point out next time, but you can't make a Jewish people believe James is from inspired of God when, number one, James doesn't claim to be inspired of God. No one ever claimed James was inspired of God in the early church. And Jesus never appointed him apostle. He is just simply Jesus's brother. But the 12 apostles chose James to be their administrator, basically, at the Church of Jerusalem. So there's a lot of weaknesses in that. But okay, I finished this first episode, and I think I made my point, which is we have a clear counterexample that the Jewish people will know about, where Paul does do away with a law provision. Not only does away with it, he turns it upside down and turns it to a self-interest, which is really even more. It would be better if he said this didn't have to do with oxen; it had to do with antelope or something. But he actually turned it about it to a very self-interested conclusion that it benefits him or the people that serve him, and that rewards them, and therefore they follow him more zealously. I mean, everything that you could possibly do to corrupt that verse looks self-interested and designed to promote yourself in one way or the other. So that's why we have to agree that 119 Ministries' strategy is wrong. It just doesn't work. Paul will be proven to the Jewish people by Tobias Singer and anybody else who just looks at the verse and studies it and points it out to the Jewish person, and then they'll feel like they were fooled. So you don't want to do that. So the right way to go about it, in my opinion, that's why I picked the Jesus words only, is go with Jesus. Just say, hey, Jesus said, I'm the sole pastor, I'm the sole teacher. Why would we have any other teacher we need to be listening to at the same authority level as Jesus? The answer is no. And I'll add one little thing and I'll let it go, is in the Reformation, when it was first started, for the first 3 years, it was Karlstadt and my cat's running up at the cat tree. I'm going to keep going. When Karlstadt was a partner with Luther, he wrote a book called the Canon, and he proposed that Paul and all the epistles, frankly, should be put in a separate section to show and indicate they are not at the same level of inspiration as Jesus, and Jesus would be put in the first section, all the Gospels. So that's really what we need to get back to. That was the profound idea. Of course, because Paul, according to Luther, actually was more knowledgeable than Jesus about the law going away. That's why Luther said to have asked Wittenberg, the government, to exile Karlstadt and throw him out of the movement. I should add that Luther did add other grounds, such as that Karlstadt allowed the people to actually touch the Eucharist. He instead was distributing unleavened bread, and he allowed them to drink wine at the communion, all the things that were totally exactly what was biblical, not a Eucharist that was round and white and a priest handed to you. There's no priest who was supposed to be delivering it to you. You're supposed to share it in a brotherhood and fellowship. Everything that was wrong in Christianity, Karlstadt had purposely fixed. And Luther, though, was so upset about the anti-Paul view, he couldn't take it, and he revolted and had Karlstadt removed. However, just for the record, Karlstadt recovered. He became a professor in Basel, Switzerland. But more importantly, by 1537, approximately, Luther writes the Antinomian Theses, and he unequivocally says in that book, he never mentions Paul directly, or at least doesn't cite him in any way that's supposed to support Paul. He then says, anybody who teaches you to do away with the law is a false prophet, just like you're saying, 119 Ministries. And you just don't have to read between the lines. He totally revolted against Paul, and he and Melanchthon came up of a solution to fix the faith alone, grace alone, principles of the Lutheran Church of their own foundation. And Melanchthon and him changed it into what's called double justification, which means you're saved initially by faith, but you must have a secondary justification by works. Same view that Tyndale had, the same view that Menno Simons had, and many of the other Protestant leaders of the Reformation. And even Luther, in his final days, had converted. However, just for the record, again, in 1560, that principle that was built, that Melanchthon got put into the Lutheran canon, Lutheran articles. He did that in 1555, I believe, but the Book of Concord removed all of that in 1580 and put it back to sola fide, both for initial salvation and for your permanent and final salvation. So no works, no righteousness. And so Jesus, when he said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, you salvation this day you received because you promised to give your ill-gotten gains that you stole from the taxpayers 4 times to the poor," Jesus said, "Salvation has come to this day, to this house." That's just, Jesus was really not aware that Paul was going to come with a better gospel. That's what we're supposed to believe, and that's what Luther actually believed in his young state. But he was wise enough, and I think God blessed him finally to realize that was wrong. So will we ever get back to what Luther realized in the end? That's what I'm saying. So God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.